Right, this is Tab TV. We're very lucky to be joined by Nicky Morgan, the Conservative MP for Loughborough and the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee. Now, you're also former Education Secretary as well.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that today is the day where Theresa May has announced a sort of review of the tuition fee system. So first of all, I wanted to ask what you make of that, given that you've been quite outspoken on the subject in the past.
Well, as Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, over the weekend we published a report on student finance, because we've been looking at the impact on the government accounts of the amount that's been loaned out so far. And one of the things we were talking about was looking at the interest rates, the government doing that, and also potentially the reintroduction of maintenance grants as well, because although more disadvantaged people are going to university, we don't want anyone to be put off by the worry about living costs. So I think I welcome the review. I mean, I think, although I think that university finance is on a much more sustainable footing now, I think after 5 years it's probably right to ask the question and to see whether the system has developed as it was intended in 2012.
Yeah, and you look at interest rates and maintenance grants, and that's what you've been highlighting in your sort of arguments about tuition fees, whereas Theresa May is talking about more of a graded system, different fees for different courses. And I understand that you disagree with that.
Well, I think the difficulty is that the worry is about social mobility, and I think it's what my successor Justine Green has been talking about as well, which is that people who would do well at, say, science or engineering type courses might be put off doing them if they felt they were more expensive. And so it's really difficult. You also end up with a huge row then about which courses more or less should be charged for. But I think it's right to say that what hasn't developed is a market between the different institutions. And I think it was expected that different institutions might charge different amounts for their degrees, but actually everyone kind of rushed up to the maximum of 9,000, which didn't turn out to be an exceptional amount. And so I think it's right that's looked at, definitely.
And can you explain why your solution, which is essentially cutting the interest that we pay on loans, would help social mobility and would save people? Because I understand it would probably save people about 10% of the tuition fees they pay at the moment, which a lot of people might say isn't enough at the moment. They're causing huge debts for students.
Well, I think, that, to be honest with you, they're different arguments. I think the interest rates one is one about fairness, which is that actually, given interest rates are so low generally at the moment, if you're borrowing money, then actually people say, well, how is it that interest rates are accruing at 6% whilst people at university? And of course, it is not so progressive, because actually people who are higher earners when they leave university obviously pay off their loans and therefore aren't having interest accruing on their outstanding balances for as long as people for whom they're not able to pay off that amount, and maybe go up to 30 years.
Is one of the logical conclusions not that more money needs to be put into education, and certainly universities? I mean, if you're talking about cutting and making various cuts that don't add up to as much as people might like, sure, there just needs to be more investment.
Well, one of the things that we identified in the report, and I think the Minister talked about, was actually how much of the loans are written off. And of course, we haven't got yet to the 30 years, but I think the government's now working on the basis that about 45% of the money loaned out is going to be written off. That is an investment by the taxpayer in the higher education system. And in the report, we say, although universities aren't awash with cash, they are on a more sustainable footing than they were. So what we haven't been debating is higher education funding in the way that we've been debating school funding. So look, I'm a firm believer in the contributory principle. I do think that people who are going to benefit from going to university should make a contribution to the amounts, but I think we have to recognise that the government and the taxpayer is also still funding an awful lot of HE spending.
Yes, there's been a lot of disagreement today between the different Conservative ministers and things about this policy. Do you think this could be as divisive as Brexit in the end between the Conservative Party?
I don't think anything will ever be as divisive as Brexit. I think it's been a fault line running through the party for a long, long time. I think what it's saying about the fees is, as I say, I think Conservatives do, all of us broadly, support the contributory principle, but actually the way the system is structured, how fees are arrived at, the process for interest rates and maintenance grants, it's right that that's looked at. And I think we all as Conservatives want to end up with a system which works for students, for families, for universities. I'm afraid we do have an issue with the Labour Party proposals, which is just to abolish tuition fees entirely, which is completely unaffordable and would end up having student numbers capped again.
Some might say at least the Labour Party have a clear, united front on this. I mean, they seem to have got their act together since the general election. With respect, in your talk, you spoke more about Boris Johnson, really, and you debated head-to-head with Jacob Rees-Mogg at the Union last week. So what evidence is there to say that the Conservatives can be united at the moment?
Well, because I think there are issues around which we are absolutely very united. Things like the budget, things like education reform, things like the NHS as well. And I think, you know, if you want to be partisan, the Labour Party doesn't have a clear position on Brexit. They're able to avoid that scrutiny because obviously they're the opposition. But Europe, of course, and Brexit, it's no secret that there are strong views within the Conservative Party on Brexit. And this is the time in which to have the debate about the end state and how the negotiations are going to go, while the government is getting its negotiation stance sorted out.
Is there a danger that with your disagreement with the party over Brexit that you're becoming more known as a Remainer rather than a Conservative? And how do you sort of find that balance between the two?
Well, look, this is the defining issue of this decade, I think future decades to come. My principle as a Member of Parliament is there's no point being on this position if you're not going to stand up for what you believe in. So
my question to you then is, why don't you join the party that stands up for what you believe in with regards to Brexit? I mean,
but Brexit's not the only issue, is it? Brexit's just one issue in politics.
Well, you could be a right-leaning Lib Dem, surely, with that.
No, I don't think so. No other party has any attraction at all to me. I'm a Conservative and have been since the age of 16.
There must be some sort of right-wing or right of centre Lib Dems that you agree with more than Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example.
But I think all political parties, and the Conservative Party is the oldest political party, I think, in the world, and you know, it's always been a broad church, so people are always going to have different opinions. Jacob and I have no hesitation about walking through the same lobby on most issues relating to the way that the Conservative government is running things. But yes, on Europe, absolutely, we will have differences of opinions.
And just to finish on that note of a broad church, I'm interested in how the Conservatives are trying to attract more youth voters. Last year there was this sort of decentralisation or disaffiliation of the party from the student groups in various universities. How can you sort of help the next generation of Conservatives to come through and show them the support they need to carry out the kind of campaigns that the Labour clubs, for example, seem to be running at student campuses?
Well, don't forget, of course, that many young people aren't at university or don't get involved in politics at university. And I was reading a very interesting report today by Tim Bale from one of the London universities, who actually, if you look at the report that he's published, showing the number of 18 to 24-year-olds in the different parties, actually the Conservatives are right up there with Labour. So we have Conservative future branches in all of our local parties, and they're very welcome. So it's not just about what's happening on campus, it's what's happening about young people being involved in politics generally.
Nicky Morgan, thanks very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.